Hello! Welcome to week 4 Nikkei Block Party. Hey, Courtney.
Hey, Erin.
How's it going?
Thank you so much for joining us. Good. How are you?
I'm great, and I'm so excited about the show that we have ahead of us tonight. So without delay, we're going to start with 2 poetry readings, a poem by Hiroshi Kashiwagi, and thank you so much to the Tule Lake Committee for allowing us to use this video, and then we'll follow it up with a reading by Larry Matsuda, and thank you so much to Friends of Minidoka for making that reading possible. So we'll take it away with our poets.
Enjoy.
Of California was a movement back in time, back to the years 1943, 44, and 45, when I was 19, 20, and 21. Being among you, sensing your youthfulness, hearing your strong voices, I search for reasons why I came after 30-some years. Tule Lake, that was a name I dared not mention, spoken warily, always with hesitation, never voluntarily. But you have made it a common name again of a small, sleepy town that it was before we came here, before we were confined here, before it became Tule Lake Relocation Center, before it became Tule Lake Segregation Center for disloyal Japanese Americans. Yes, it's right that we're here to see firsthand where 18,000 of us lived for 3 years or more, to see again the barbed wire fence, the guard towers, the MPs, the machine guns, bayonets and tanks, the barracks, the mess halls, the shower rooms and latrines.
My dad used to call it it looks like a upside down abalone cell.
Yes, it's right to feel the bitter cold of the severe winters, the warmth of the pot-bellied stove, and the dust storms. How can we forget the sand biting into our skin, filling our eyes and nose and mouth and ears, graying our hair in an instant?
We walked just across the way.
We came here.
I thought I saw it over here
somewhere around here.
Yes, it's right to recall the directives of the War Relocation Authority, their threats and lies, the meetings, the strikes, the resistance, arrests, stockades, violence, attacks, murder, derangement, pain, grief, separation, departure, informers, recriminations, disagreements, loyalty, disloyalty, yes, yes, no, 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 yes, issei, nisei, kibe. These are words now, but they were lived here. There were deaths and births and lovemaking in the firebreak with the warden's flashlight shining on you. Yes, and movies, socials, dances, sports, card games and religion, sewing classes, flower arrangement, doll making, wood carving, beauty behind barbed wires. Recreation was big. It was encouraged. Keep 'em busy, keep 'em occupied, keep 'em sane for heaven's sake. But a Chronicle reporter observed, there are 18,000 mental patients living in confinement at Tule Lake. So it is right that we are here. It is right that I remember and tell it. I wish I could share the feeling I have now with the Issei and Nisei, they who lived here, they who do not speak of it, who pass it off as a good time experience. Whatever we did here, the commitments we made, loyal or disloyal, compliance or resistance, yes or no, it was right. Because the young people make it so, because they seek the history from those of us who lived it. So we must remember and tell it. We must acknowledge it and tell it. So we are here, the Abalone Mountain, the Castle Rock, the dry lake bed where tules still grow. But the barracks, where are the barracks? And where apartment 4005D? Home once long ago, sold, demolished, gone. Little remains except what's trapped in our heads far back somewhere. I'm glad I made this trip. Somehow I feel a meeting of youths. Your youth, your energy, your enthusiasm, your sense of justice with the youth that I was. Idealistic, intense, angry. It's a happy meeting. It is even better that I can stand aside after 30-odd years and see it. This meeting to meet, to share, to learn, to struggle, to continue. I sense an immense feeling of continuity with you, all of you. Yes, it's right. It's right. And I'm glad I came back to Tule Lake with you.
The second poem that I'm going to read is entitled The Noble Thing, and it deals with the effects and after effects of the forced incarceration. For the poem, you need to know the vocabulary word shikataganai. It's a Japanese word that means it can't be helped in English. The Noble Thing. Dad never talked about Minidoka. That was the noble thing. Before World War II, there was Garfield High School for him, ice skating on Green Lake, dances at Lake Wilderness Lodge. Later, his ownership of Elk Grocery on Seneca Street. He and my mother were married in 1941, 10 months later to be removed, forced into the Minidoka concentration camp. Mom was 5 months pregnant in August. with my older brother Alan. With blackout curtains drawn, the train left Puyallup and climbed the Cascade Mountains until the land flattened and the inescapable sun transformed the train cars into a moving sauna. People gasped small, panicked breaths from the superheated air. Shikataganai, it can't be helped. The train stopped by the side of an unmarked road in the Idaho desert, released its passengers miles from any station. Rumors spread they would be shot or marched to death, their bodies stacked, then carted away to some awaiting ditch. Nowhere to run, they walk in their best shoes in the gritty sand as on the face of the moon. The heat caused some to faint as they carried all that they could. 3 years later, Dad returned to Seattle after the war, developed a bleeding ulcer, lost his janitor job at a rural hotel. Depression took Mom away like invisible armed guards. She was a stranger, a stick-like figure with arms and legs poking out of a white smock, pacing the sidewalk next to the Western State Hospital turnaround. Dad never talked about it. None of it. I never heard him say the word Minidoka. Come on, endure the unbearable with dignity. Shikataganai, my best friend's mother chose pills for suicide. After school, Randy, my neighbor, opened the garage door and found his father in a black suit, his best, hanged by the neck. Shikataganai, the same path other Seattle Japanese chose. Numbers unknown. Shikataganai. We, however, never talked about it. That was the noble thing to do. Thank you for attending my reading. Please join me again for the second session, which focuses in on proving loyalty, and the last session is legacy. Looking forward to seeing you then. Have a great day.
Hi, everyone. Wow, those were some powerful words. We are very fortunate to have, actually, I wanted to just really quickly clarify that Larry will be doing a book talk. So that is what he was referencing as far as this second session. Erin is going to put those details in the chat for you guys. I am going to now introduce a very special person to me. Her name is Margaret Ozaki-Graves, and she is actually also my lovely cousin. She is a Japanese American performer who works primarily in opera and musical theater. She's performed in opera houses across the country and was featured in LA Opera's preview performance of The White Bird of Poston, which is a story of Japanese American incarceration. She's a cultural consultant for the Japanese Arts Network, as well as a Central City Opera touring artist, where she also serves as education coordinator and provides performance and project curation as resident soprano soloist with Arts on Colorado. And as you'll see in this next video, prior to singing, Margaret was a professional Japanese instrumentalist, playing taiko, koto, and shamisen. So please enjoy this video, the story of our family with Margaret Ozaki-Graves.
Oh, we came to. Not that we came. Government brought us to US.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Margaret Ozaki-Graves, for creating and sharing that beautiful video and story. Just really moving. We are, I can't believe it, already at the point in the show where I'm going to introduce our featured performer. As you all know, we are coming to the end of our week 4 programming, and the theme this week was a question of loyalty. And to end this evening, we have 2 stories from Alton Chung, a master storyteller born and raised in Hawaii, who is going to tell us stories about Ben Kuroki and Frank Emmy. I won't, go into anything. I will let Alton tell his story, but I'm so delighted that we're able to share these with you. Thank you so much, Alton, for agreeing to do this and performing for us. If you have any questions or thoughts for Alton, please feel free to leave them in the chat on YouTube. We'll try to answer some at the end if there are questions, and we'll also have more time with Alton tomorrow afternoon. So stay tuned to hear more about that program. But now it is absolutely my pleasure to introduce Alton Chung.
Thank you so very much for the opportunity to be here with all of you tonight. So let us begin. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, veterans and honored guests. Welcome to this traveling exhibit of the Japanese American experience of World War II. I am the curator and your humble tour guide. We have collected stories which may allow you to discover some new insights into what it might have been like to be a Japanese American during the war. We believe these stories to be testaments to the endurance of the human spirit. It is our hope that this will inspire you by all the experiences that you have here tonight. During World War II, the Japanese Americans on the West Coast were taken from their homes and their communities and placed into incarceration camps. Of those incarcerated, 40% were children and 70% were American citizens. Now, the immigrants who came from Japan to the United States are called Issei. And the children of the Issei, the second generation Japanese Americans born in the United States, are called Nisei. Some of these Nisei took it upon themselves to volunteer to fight for their country and to prove their loyalty. Now, a handful of Nisei flew in bombers over Europe during the war. But the most famous of them all was a man by the name of Ben Kuroki. I grew up in western Nebraska. My father came from Japan to work as a laborer for the railroads. He became a farmer and settled down in the small town of Hershey, just west of North Platte. In my senior year, I was the class vice president, and I graduated in the top 5 of my class. Then again, there are only 10 of us, so I guess it's really nothing really to brag about. Well, after high school, I bought a truck and began delivering potatoes from our farm to the markets in Oklahoma City. And in my spare time, I took flying lessons. And late in 1941, I soloed. Just another all-American kid. Now, that first Sunday in December, the Japanese American Citizens League, the JACL, was held a meeting in a church in North Platte. Now, the JACL, well, they were a patriotic group fighting for racial equality. Mike Masaoka was the national secretary of the JACL. He was speaking to us, and right in the middle of his talk, the police came in and they grabbed him and threw him in jail. That's when we learned about Pearl Harbor. Now, my parents taught me about shame, and they pounded it into our heads that you never bring shame to yourself or to your family. And I felt guilty about what the Japanese had done at Pearl Harbor. I wanted to avenge what the Japanese had done and for causing what I considered to be shame. I hated the fact that I was born Japanese. I didn't want to be called a Jap. I wanted to prove my loyalty. I was an American citizen, and I wanted to fight for my country against Japan. Next morning, my younger brother Fred and I, we decided to volunteer for the Army. Well, we went down and we signed up, and we waited. They never called us back. Then I heard that the Army Air Corps was taking enlistments in the next town over, so I called up the recruiting sergeant and asked if nationality was going to be an issue. And he said, heck no, I get paid $2 for every person I sign up. You said your name was Kuroki, right? What do you know? My brother-in-law is Polish too. Well, Fred and I were the only Japanese recruits around. The Army then suddenly sent Fred off to be part of a ditch digging group with no explanation. I was set to peel potatoes for 21 straight days. I was pretty miserable, but I was still in the Army Air Corps. When I first saw my first B-24 heavy bomber, the Liberator, it just kind of took my breath away. I mean, it was the most impressive thing I'd ever seen. First, I signed up to be a pilot. And then, a mechanic. But they ended up sending me to clerical school. I was a buck private clerk in the 93rd Bomb Group. And when it appeared that I was going to be transferred, I begged with tears in my eyes to be able to go with the group to go and fight in Europe. I mean, some people felt that I shouldn't go because of my name. But my commanding officer, he said, heck with that. I'm going, and Kuroki, you're going too. Now, they had pegged a tour of duty to be 25 missions. I mean, they just picked that number out of the air. I mean, but still, it gave us something to focus on. 25 missions. That just seemed like an impossibly high number to get a chance to go home. You see, at this time, the Luftwaffe was in its prime, and the German anti-aircraft, the Flak, was highly accurate. I mean, as a gunner in a bomber, you sit behind these really powerful 50 caliber machine guns, but you can't do anything against the Flak. these German anti-aircraft shells, these 88s, would come flying up at you and just go boom and woof, 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 and the plane would shudder this way and shudder that way. It was terrifying. Lots of gunners just kind of froze at their guns. Well, the Air Corps soon discovered that there was a sudden need for more gunners. Well, I signed up to go to gunnery school. 2 weeks later, poof, I was now a gunner. Jake Epting was from Mississippi, and at 22, he was one of the top B-24 pilots. He had a spot in his plane, so I joined his crew. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, I felt like I belonged. It was great to be finally accepted and respected. I mean, I can't tell you what it felt like. I mean, nobody cared about my ancestry. And I earned a permanent spot on Epting's plane and as their top turret gunner. I even got a nickname. They called me the most honorable son. The brass, they shipped us to Algeria. They had us practice low-level flying for our big secret mission. We were to destroy the Nazi-held oil fields at Ploesti, Romania. Now, Ploesti supplied all of Italy and a third of Germany's oil. It'd be a 1,200-mile round trip. We would barely have enough fuel to make it back to base. Ploesti was also more highly defended per square mile than Berlin. Operation Tidal Wave began on August 1st, 1943. Our squadron commander, he took over as pilot. And our pilot, Jake, he flew as co-pilot. Our normal co-pilot, 5x5 Jim, he flew as waist gunner on that mission. 4 other bomb groups joined the 93rd for a total of 178 bombers, 1,751 airmen. We're flying over the Mediterranean when suddenly the lead plane, the Wongo Wongo, just kind of plunged into the ocean. No one got out. We never really learned what happened, but it just kind of seemed like a bad omen. We passed over the Danube and dropped down to about 300 feet, and we all kind of came into formation. And 10 miles from the target, we all dropped down to about 50 feet and began following the contours of the land. Well, up ahead, that lead plane, that whole group, they just kind of took a wrong turn and started taking everyone off course. But the 93rd, we broke off and we headed back toward Ploesti. But by the time we got there, the Germans already knew we were coming. And they baked a cake. These innocent-looking haystacks in front of us just suddenly opened up, and all of a sudden there was these guns pointing back up at us, and more guns appeared out of railroad cars and out of fake buildings. And Jake began shouting, "Start shooting! Start shooting!" After that, things just happened really fast. Shells started kind of flying up at us, kind of just spread out like railroad tracks. And suddenly someone shouted out, "Junior's on fire!" We all kind of looked at the plane over on our right wingtip, and the plane was on fire from nose to tail. And we could actually see people burning up. That plane just kind of just plunged down and just exploded into a million pieces. Seconds later, this huge oil tank right in front of us just exploded, and flames just kind of leapt up, and that oil tank itself, that flew up like a tin can, higher than the flames. I didn't think we were going to get out of that. But our squadron commander, he just took that plane and he turned it on its side. And I could feel that heat coming through my top turret. And then we went through that fireball and we just kind of leveled out. And when we did, there, right in front of us, we saw Hell's Wench. It was the plane of our group commander, Lieutenant Colonel Baker. We saw him kind of going up and up and up. And then all of a sudden we saw one parachute come out and then another parachute. And then the plane just kind of nosed over and went crashing down to that biggest building in front of it. we dropped our bombs, and the whole plane just kind of lurched forward. I mean, when you let go of tons of bombs, your speed just kind of increases. And we were flying low and fast, and we were alone. There was no one else with us. We flew for 13 hours straight that day. On that day, 53 bombers were lost. 310 airmen were killed. 1 man in 5. The Tupelo last, Jake's plane, didn't have a single bullet hole in it. And we thought, hey, it's great. We made it through. But the question we kept asking ourselves was, where was everyone else? The thing that I remember most was the following day. Early in the morning, it was quiet and the desert was still. And suddenly we heard someone calling out. Junior! Junior! This is our normal co-pilot, 5x5 Jim, who flew as a waist gunner in that mission. He saw Junior Canfield's plane catch on fire and crash before his very eyes. See, Junior Canfield was an 18-year-old kid who lied about his age to get into pilot school. He and Jim, they were best of friends. Although it was estimated that 40% of refinery capacity had been damaged in that raid, most of the damage was repaired within a few weeks. The raid on Pleste resulted in no meaningful drop in oil production for the Reich. When I finished up my 25th mission, I volunteered to fly another 5 missions. These are for my brother Fred, who was still in an Army unit back in the States. And on my 30th mission, flak just shattered my turret. Plexiglass shards just came flying at me and cut my face and shredded my mask. And I think I would have died if my crewmates hadn't pulled me out of my turret and slapped an emergency oxygen mask on me. December 1943, I went back to the States. In the spring of 1944, I was ordered to report to the Heart Mountain Relocation Center. Driving up to the gates, I was shocked to see the barbed wire, the guard towers, and the armed guards. And behind the barbed wire, there were people who looked like me. I had learned that they were now drafting Japanese Americans from these incarceration camps, and I was there to go and help build morale and to increase enlistments. I was given a hero's welcome, and there was this huge banner said, "Welcome, Sergeant Ben Kuroki." And huge crowd showed up. They say about 3,000 people, about a third of the entire camp. I talked about my experiences, about being a farm boy and serving my country. I was really gung-ho. And I said in combat, I found the acceptance I've been craving. And I told them that anyone who resisted the Dravo, they just lacked initiative and they were easily influenced by others. And I told them that if they thought Japan was going to win the war, they're crazy. Japan was going to be bombed off the map. And that's when I started hearing a few hisses and boos. Later on, I met with a small group of Nisei draft resistors and members of the Fair Play Committee. We just couldn't see eye to eye. And after a while, the discussion got really heated. Some guys wanted to go and beat me up. Hardly anyone was there for my send-off. After Heart Mountain, they sent me to Minidoka and then to Topaz, and by that time, I had had enough. I remember one day, I was trying to catch a cab. I was standing there in my uniform with my medals and my ribbons, but another serviceman wouldn't share the cab with me. In fact, he slammed the door in my face and said, "I ain't riding with no lousy Jap." It was then that I decided to try to get back into the war. I asked the Army Air Corps to allow me to fly again. This time I wanted to fly in B-29 bombers. I mean, they were larger and they flew farther and they carried more bombs than any other bomber in the whole world at that time. I mean, they were designed and built to bomb Japan. After months of training, I finally received a letter from the Secretary of War allowing me to serve in the Pacific due to my outstanding war record. I became the first and only Japanese American to serve in active combat in the Air Corps in the Pacific. I was assigned to be a tail gunner on a B-29, and at a stop in Hawaii, the crew named the plane after my new nickname, the Honorable Sad Saki. It referred to a popular cartoon, Sad Sack, which was about a well-meaning but inept soldier. At our base in Tinian in the Marianas, I mean, there were still Japanese soldiers up in the hills. So wherever we went, my crew made sure they clustered around me. And they always made sure that one person was in front of me and another person behind me. I always wore my helmet and my dark sunglasses. So you see, Marines have a tendency to shoot first and ask questions later. I couldn't even go out to the latrine in the middle of the night for fear of getting shot. I once told my commanding officer, he should put me in for a Purple Heart. Why should you get a Purple Heart? Bladder damage, sir. I mean, I felt safer going on a mission than I did on my base in Tinian. It was a 20-hour round trip to go from our base to Japan. And when we flew over Tokyo at about 7,000 feet, the flak was terrible. We dropped our load of incendiary bombs, and the whole city kind of went up like a lit match. I mean, the incendiaries started a firestorm. That night, 80,000 people died. I felt bad for the women, children. But this was war. By July of 1945, Japan's major cities were all gone, just leveled by fire. The next month, a B-29 called the Enola Gay, which had been parked next to the Honorable Sadsaki, dropped an atomic bomb on Japan. One bomb. Tens of thousands of people dead. Another bomb. More tens of thousands of people dead, and many, many more thousands dying of radiation sickness. The enemy. Japanese. Men. Women. Children. The war was over, and I was going home alive. By the end of the war, I had flown a total of 58 missions. I had also been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with 2 oak leaf clusters for a second and third award, and the Air Medal with 5 oak leaf clusters. And then 2005, on the 60th year after the end of the war, I was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for my combat participation during the war and for overcoming many incidences of prejudice in my fight for my right to fight for my country. In part, the citation reads, "For service above and beyond the call of duty, accomplished in both combat theaters in World War II, while serving in 4 separate air forces and taking part in 58 combat missions. Throughout, he overcame acts of prejudice and earned the nickname Most Honorable Son." Hot Mountain was one of the 10 incarceration camps set up by the War Relocation Authority in 1942. In 1943, the government wanted to draft young men from these camps. But to test their loyalty, the government sent out a questionnaire. At Hot Mountain, a handful of young men refused to answer the questions or to be drafted until their civil rights were restored. The leader of this draft resistance called themselves the Fair Play Committee. And one of the most prominent members of that committee was a man by the name of Frank Emmy. When you get pushed around enough, somewhere you have to draw the line. You have to take a stand. They wanted to draft us from the camps, and I thought that was wrong. Restore our civil rights, free our families, and we'd be glad to serve. We paid the price for standing up, for taking a stand. 2 years in prison and 50 years of scorn from my own people. After Pearl Harbor, we never dreamt that we were going to get in any kind of trouble. I mean, we were Nisei. We were born in this country. We were U.S. citizens. We were so naive. You cannot imagine the hostility we faced overnight. Suddenly, we were made to feel every bit as guilty as the enemy for simply having a Japanese face. Whipped up by the politicians and the special interest groups and the newspapers, the president ordered mass evacuations and incarceration. Many Japanese Americans, they fled to the free zone, away from the West Coast. Those of us who stayed, by the summer of 1942, we were forced to leave. 2/3 of us who were incarcerated were U.S. citizens. Now, we owned a small grocery store in Los Angeles, into which we had invested $25,000. It was a lot of money back then, considering the fact that a quart of milk was 10 cents, and potatoes were a penny a pound, and a loaf of bread was either 5 or 10 cents. We sold the store for $1,500, or 6 cents on the dollar. Now, most of the community leaders had been arrested by the FBI after Pearl Harbor. The leadership of the Japanese American community was assumed by the Japanese American Citizens League, the JACL. And they said that we should cooperate, evacuate, and not cause any trouble. Well, we figured that they knew best. I didn't think much of my rights at that time. We could only take 50 pounds per suitcase, and they could only take 2 suitcases between my wife and myself. We also had a small child and another on the way. So not only did we have to pack for ourselves, but also for our children. And we had to walk between these lines of armed soldiers, standing there with rifles and bayonets. Behind the soldiers was this jeep with this machine gun mounted there, all the time sweeping our line, going front to back and forth, back and forth. After spending 4 months at the Pomona Assembly Center, we were shipped to the Heart Mountain Incarceration Camp between Cody and Powell in Wyoming in September of 1942. When we arrived that day, there was a dust storm. Our new home was a forlorn and desolate sight. Row after row of these wood and tar paper shacks with dust swirling around them. I was frustrated. I couldn't vote, I couldn't work, I couldn't go to school, I couldn't get out. I was just stuck. Were we American citizens? Were we Americans even? Were we aliens? We were Japanese, but we were not Japanese citizens. We were so confused, we did not know who we were. The JACL was led by Mike Masaoka, and he insisted that Nisei, second-generation Japanese Americans, had to spill their blood for America. And he called for the drafting of young men from the camps to serve in the military. As spokesperson for the JACL, Mike Masaoka was never sent to camp. In early 1943, the government announced that they would allow Japanese Americans to join the army. Volunteers would be taken to form a segregated unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, led by white officers. And Mike Masaoka, he was the first to sign up. The drive for volunteers from the camps fell a little short. Of the 14,000 eligible young men in the camps, only 1,200 volunteered. At Heart Mountain, of the 2,300 eligible men, 38 volunteered. I mean, those who volunteered from the camps, they wanted to prove their loyalty and their right to live as good American citizens. I tried to understand their point of view, but I was an American citizen. I had done nothing wrong. And I felt that I did not have to prove my loyalty to anyone. But the government wanted proof. They made everyone 17 years old or older in camp to sign a loyalty oath, a questionnaire. All the questions were innocuous except for two. Questions 27 and 28. Question 27. Would you be willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty, wherever ordered? If you answered yes, does that mean that you were volunteering to serve for the military immediately? What would happen to the elderly, the old folks, and the women? What would happen to them if they said no? Question 28. Will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any and all attacks by foreign or domestic forces? And do you forswear any form of allegiance to the Japanese emperor or for any foreign government, power, or organization? How can we forswear something to which we had never sworn allegiance? And if you answered yes to this question, it implied that at one time you had sworn allegiance to the Emperor of Japan. Since US law did not allow Issei to become citizens, by saying yes, does that mean that these Issei would lose their Japanese citizenship? Would they become stateless without a country? Would family members who answered no, no be sent to a separate camp from those who answered yes, yes? Would those who answered no, no be immediately deported back to Japan? No one was sure of the consequences of either a yes or no answer. Bitter conflicts erupted between friends and families. Would you serve in the U.S. military in combat? Would you renounce any loyalty to the Japanese emperor? Those who answered yes, yes were considered to be loyal. Those who answered no, no were considered to be disloyal. They were called no-nos or no-no boys. They were shipped to the Tule Lake Incarceration Center in Northern California. I answered the questions with a qualification. I wrote on my questionnaire, under the present conditions and circumstances, I am unable to answer these questions. And I was willing to serve, if drafted, provided that they restored my constitutional rights and allowed my family and myself to go back to our home. I thought that maybe others in the camp might also be having difficulty answering these questions. So I wrote out the answers to my questions by hand, and then my brother and I went out on a midnight excursion, posting the answers for questions 27 and 28 on latrine doors and in mess halls all over the camp. Later, I found out that answering these questions with a qualified answer was the same as answering them no. In the winter of 1944, the government announced that they would now draft Nisei from the camps. Now, as a married man with 2 small children, I was not eligible for the draft. But Kiyoshi Okamoto, who called himself the Fair Play Committee of One, said that it was unconstitutional to conscript men who had been stripped of their civil rights into military service. By incarcerating us, the government had abridged our rights without due process. What was right, and what was wrong, and the government was wrong. The JACL maintained that only unquestioned compliance, military service, and the ultimate sacrifice in war, if necessary, would prove our loyalty to the country. I felt that if we could either tuck our tails between our legs like dogs, or stand up like free men and fight for justice. Few of us resisted, and we organized ourselves and called ourselves the Fair Play Committee. We urged young men to not show up to their physical examinations or to their induction when called. That first week, 5 young men did not get on the induction bus. The next week, 7 men did not show up. The JACL newspaper, the Pacific Citizen, and the camp newspaper, the Heart Mountain Sentinel, they called us resistors. They also called us dimwit and halfwits and nuts and demented and seditionists and traitors and disloyals. Yet, every week, dozens of young men failed to show up for the draft. Sergeant Mike Masaoka, now of the 442nd Unit, and was the unit publicist, he warned us that we were undoing all the good image created by the soldiers, and that they would have caused them to shed their blood in vain. The JACL newspaper threatened us that we would be ostracized from American society. The government and the JACL, they needed a hero. They found one in a farmer's son who had volunteered for the Free Zone of Nebraska, Sergeant Ben Kuroki. He was a top turret gunner of a B-24 and had flown 30 missions over North Africa and Europe, and had also been awarded 2 Distinguished Service Flying Crosses. He was the first Japanese-American hero and the perfect poster boy for the JACL. The government sent Ben Kuroki to build morale and recruitment inside the camps. At Heart Mountain, Kuroki was given a hero's welcome, and there was a big sign saying, "Welcome, Sergeant Ben Kuroki." And a huge crowd, about a third of the camp, 3,000 people, came out to see him. All the young girls, they thought he was so handsome. Kuroki was really gung-ho. He said that all those who fought the draft, well, they just lacked initiative. I thought, he doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. He was a Nebraska boy. He was a free American. He didn't know anything about the camps. And yet here he was, telling us that we should join the army. The government had taken everything from us. And now they wanted to draft us? Psst. There were guys in camp who wanted to kill him. He was under protection the whole time he was here. And the day Kuroki left, 6 more men did not show up for the draft. On March 24th, 1944, the arrests began at dawn. At Heart Mountain, 1 out of every 9 young men drafted did not show up for induction. A week later, in the largest mass draft resistance trial in the state history, 63 resistors from Heart Mountain were put on trial, found guilty, and sentenced to 3 years in a federal penitentiary. In July of 1944, the FBI came back to Heart Mountain and arrested me and all the other members of the Fair Play Committee. It was really hard on my wife. See, not only was she now married to a disloyal, she also had to take care of our 2 young children, all by herself. The 7 of us were found guilty and sentenced to 4 years at Leavenworth Penitentiary for conspiring to violate the Selective Service Act and for counseling other Nisei to resist the draft. Kuroki was interviewed after the trial, and he called us fascists and said that our activities were like a stab in the back and that we had torn down all that the Nisei had been trying to do. On Christmas of 1945, the appeals court threw out our convictions, and I was given a new suit, $25, and a train ticket back to Los Angeles. I went back to the family store to see what had become of it. The store had changed hands during the war, and I told the new owners that we had owned the store and had been forced to sell it when we were forced to leave. And I asked him what he paid for it. He said he had paid almost $100,000. The resistors were finally released in 1946, and on Christmas 1947, we learned that the members of the Fair Play Committee had been pardoned by President Truman. After the war, several of the resistants were again drafted for service in the Korean War, but this time as free citizens with all of their rights, they gladly served. Many veterans felt that they and their buddies had put their lives on the line, and many had never come back. They felt that they had done the right thing and that their friends had died for the country. How dare we not serve? We felt that we had put our own lives and reputations on the line. We felt that we too had done what we had thought was right. We were made outcasts from the Japanese American community. Unrecognized and forgotten, those of us who resisted, we built our lives in isolation. The shame of having a son be called a draft dodger hurt parents as well. The last thing that happened was that, one resistor's mother was ostracized from the Issei community. Then the last thing that happened to her was that she was told not to come back to church. It was shortly after that she took her own life. In July 2000, the JACL finally voted to apologize to the Heart Mountain resistors. But even then, several JACL old-timers walked out of the meeting in protest. FDR said that Americanism is not a matter of race or ancestry. Americanism is a matter of mind and heart. He said that about men who fought in combat. But we fought on our own battlefield. We took a stand as Americans. We paid the price of doing what we thought was right and standing up for our rights. Today, members of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team and the Heart Mountain Fair Play Committee are now viewed as different yet complementary examples of praiseworthy Americanism. I have no regrets about what we did. And yet, the healing needs to continue with compassion and understanding. Well, that concludes our tour for today. I hope that you've gained some new insights as to the Japanese-American experience of World War II. Please come back again. As long as the exhibit is open, I will be here. Now, I will be here for a little while to answer any questions you may have. But until we meet again, thank you and good night.
Thank you so much, Alton.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Just incredible and really a perfect ending to this week when we've been thinking about so many of the themes and stories that you touched on. So we are so grateful for your time and your energy, and that was captivating, just truly.
Well,
thank
good.
you
I'm
so
glad.
much. I don't know if we had any questions. I'm going to guess that our audience was just too involved in the stories, but that's okay because we have another chance tomorrow.
There was a comment that
Okay.
somebody just mentioned how young Frank Emmy was,
Yes.
and how brave. So
Yeah. He was quite young. I mean, he was a young man. He was with a brand new, young family.
Right.
yeah,
And I had the opportunity. I interviewed him on the phone before he passed away for this piece, and I was lucky enough to do that. And just considering all the things that he went through, he's a very gracious man, and very self-deprecating and everything. But I just can't imagine. I mean, being totally isolated from your community for so long and having to go and make your own way through the world without any help from anyone else, and actually scorn and anger was heaped upon them, for years. And it was only toward the end of his life where people actually recognized him for what he had done, and all the other members of the committee. By then, several of them had passed away already.
Yeah. Well, thank you for telling his story, and telling it in as Frank, I think, is so powerful. Just to hear his voice through you, and thank you.
Well, I'm so glad. I'm hoping that people enjoyed the show, and thank you so very much for allowing me the opportunity to be here to share these stories, because I rarely tell these stories, and so this is a great opportunity.
Oh, well, thank you. We are truly honored. And tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific time, we will hear 2 more of Alton's stories, and then we'll have the chance to really pick his brain. I have about 20 questions already lined up. So, folks, you got to get your questions in quickly. But thank you so much, Alton, really, for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Alton. Well, we are, I guess that concludes week 4. We're halfway through,
Wow.
which is crazy. Okay. And here are our credits. So next week, we will be having Kurt Ikeda return with another poetry reading, which we're very excited about. The originator of Tadaima, right, Erin?
Yes, Tadaima. Yes, the originator of tonight.
And then we have a live reading from Brandon Shimoda, which I'm personally very excited about. We're going to have some dance from Miki Orihara, former Martha Graham dancer, New York City. We'll have some information about the census, and then we will bring our feature program from Hoetsu Taiko in Chicago. So very excited for all of that.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you so much, Courtney. Another great week of co-hosting. And thank you, Kimiko and Royce in the back. And thank you again to Alton and Lawrence Matsuda, Hiroshi Kashiwagi, and Margaret Ozaki-Graves for all that you did for this week. And we will see you all next week.
And tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow, Alton. Thank you again. That was just so great.
Good night, everyone.
Take care. Bye.